and today we're going to talk about visual thinking as a sense-making tool. And I'm going to share some of my personal stories, and then we will also talk about the sense-making as a phenomenon. What does that mean? And I'm not a big expert in that, so most of the time I'll be just sharing my opinions. I will also talk about the decision-making process and how it's connected to sense-making and why it's important to know a bit more about that in our professional life. And then finally, I'm going to build up toward an example of how visual thinking as a tool could be applied to capturing some sort of a complexity. And tonight it's going to be looking at the organizational complexity that you're dealing with in your professional life. So that's the overview of the agenda. And the way it's going to work is that I'm going to draw as I talk, and I will use a lot of markers and pens. I'm a big nerd when it comes to that part. And you can do that together with me, which is preferable, because that way you could practice and connect to the material on a deeper level, and it will be more fun if you just repeat after me. And you can use paper, just like I'm doing here, or you could do that digitally if you prefer drawing on a tablet or on a computer. Do what fits you. Just make sure you have stuff with you to draw and get that stuff ready, because we are going to explore the topic right away. And by the way, I'm going to record this session and share that on my YouTube channel. If you want to watch it later, share with your friends or with someone who wanted to be here with us tonight but couldn't join for whatever reason. All right, so this one here is about where the story begins for me. And I must tell you that when I was a kid, I did not have much source for entertainment. My kids, they're watching Netflix, they are playing video games, YouTube, and all of that good stuff. It's really difficult to be bored nowadays. But when I was a kid, there were not so many options available for me. So those were the books we had at home, and maybe watching a TV sometime. And the TV was not that fantastic in those days. So when I was about, I don't remember precisely, maybe 5 or 6 years old, I was browsing through the books at our home, and then I found one huge book, which was a huge book, a very heavy one, and it was in Russian. It was called Atlas Офицера. And in English, it would be Officer's Atlas. So what is that? Well, the atlas is a collection of maps. And the Officer's Atlas is a collection of maps that tell a story about the conflicts of the past, different battles and wars and whatnot. And that was a collection of different depictions of historical events from the very, very old ages, the ancient Greek times, up to as recent as World War II. And the book was dated 1948 or 47, doesn't matter, but it was published shortly after the World War II. And what I liked about it is that it had almost no text, only drawings. That's my best type of book. So the maps would be something like this. They would have features like mountains, rivers, roads, and they would also have the symbolic depictions of how the military units were located on that map, and they were in different colors, red and blue, and they only had some kind of legends in the bottom telling me how to read those maps. So they would say something, okay, this is a unit, and this is the movement, And that was something I could read and understand, so meaning that that was really easy to decipher the complex events that were depicted in those maps. So these maps, you could say, were telling a lot of visual storytelling about the events of the past. And it was really fun watching those movies, the static movies unfold before my eyes. And then one of the maps that attracted me the most, and I did not understand precisely back in those days, was a map about the Battle of Cannae. And the reason I liked that part the most is because it was somewhat animated. So it had the major plan for the battle with some, again, mountains, depictions of cities, for example, the city of Cannae. It showed how the different units were located, and also it was different from the rest because, unlike the rest, it did not show just the main movements. It also had a smaller part on the map where there was a visual storytelling of different stages of the battle. And that was interesting because that was a kind of a cartoon inside of the map. And there, what I could see is that there were like two acts of the battle, where they showed how the Carthaginians were located on the map, on the battle map, before the commencing of the battle, and after, when the battle was over, unfortunately, with a huge humiliating loss for the Romans. And the way that animation was represented is that they showed how the units of Carthaginians enveloped the Romans from the sides. And I must tell you, I was a little kid back then, and these events are tragic and dramatic in its scale and size, but interestingly enough, I could understand what was happening there, because the language used on that map was very simple and easy to follow, and you could understand that something happened. So here the units moved toward each other, and here these units on the left and on the right from the Romans, the blue units for Carthaginians, they returned and they created a kind of a pocket around the Romans. That did not require any explanation at all. It was so obvious. I was really impressed by the book, and maybe that's where my love for visual thinking in general and visual storytelling began. I really was amazed that with just really simple things, simple boxes, circles, lines, not so much use of color, with just this much of symbolic information, you can convey so much. And then later I started hearing things like, what is so powerful about visual thinking? It's the possibility of using something as simple as, let's say, a box representing an infantry unit on the map, and abstracting that from the complex reality and offering that as a kind of a key to the observer, and trusting that this observer is smart enough to decipher and build the complex world inside of their imagination, translating that symbol, that simplistic element on that map into something that is very complex in its nature. And this is such an effective way to communicate that you don't actually need to give any extra on top of it. Inside of the observer's head, there will be a huge complexity happening. The brain will simulate a lot of the things associated with what is happening in reality. So that is something that I think I inherited from absorbing like a sponge all of that visual information in that fantastic book. So that is my biggest takeaway from that, and that is something I would like to share with you. The power of visual thinking is that you don't have to depict a complex stuff with complex symbol. You just need to agree with your observer that this key is understandable enough and can be easily translated so that you can unlock the person's imagination. So that's something I would like you to take away from this particular slide, that you need to find a simple way to unlock your observer, your audience's imagination. And I want to say a big thank you to that big heavy book that opened that for me, because I think it traces back to that atlas. And then it takes us then to the next question, right? If the visual thinking is about creating those keys that activate a person's imagination, so what is this sense making as a process about? What constitutes that imagination? Because we are really curious to know what is happening inside of the person's head. And then in the recent years, I was trying to make sense of the informational design and what is the knowledge, what is wisdom. And I came across this pyramid called DIKW, which stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I think it's a concept from psychology, if I'm not mistaken, but that's not super important. I'll just decipher this concept for you. So this pyramid sets these different concepts in a certain relationship where you start building from the bottom, from data up towards wisdom. So you have data, you have information, you have knowledge, and then finally you have a wisdom. So what is data? And by data, normally people understand facts, objective observations, signals, stimuli, something that does not depend on anyone's opinion. It's just those bits and pieces that are absolutely true and can be observed around us and could be perceived with our senses. And all of them are true, but they are not useful as such because they are just facts. It's just like Lego building blocks. Yes, they're there, but they don't make much sense themselves. Then the information, it's something more interesting, because the information is a kind of a combination of those facts, a combination rendered through establishing those facts and bits and pieces into a certain relationship, into a certain structure, and I think the word structure is key here, that make that combination, I'll draw it as a huge ellipse here, and making that collection of data set in a certain relationship useful for someone. So it's a structure of data that is made useful for someone. So basically it's data that is aggregated into a combination that from someone's perspective starts making sense. That's where the sense making begins. The sense making is setting these bits and pieces together into a model that would make sense from a certain perspective. So, for example, from a perspective of a question who, or from a question what, and so forth. And that also implies an actor, an observer, a human being, and a certain point of view, a certain problem. Now, the knowledge is interesting because the knowledge is then taking that structure, this information, and placing that in a certain context of a situation. So you take that huge ellipse, and that is comprised of facts, and bits and pieces of data are combined into information, and that actor for whom this information makes sense. He or she basically takes that oval, that ellipse, and places that into a certain context or a situation. So, for example, what if I apply this knowledge so that right now I'm not happy with the state A, and hopefully by applying that to my reality, I assume that it will become better. So that is the knowledge. Placing a certain concept into the context of your experience, applying to your values, and so forth. And then the wisdom, and that's my interpretation, as I mentioned before, I'm not an expert in this, but that's just me trying to make sense of these things, is something that comes with a lot of experience, with a lot of attempts of that person placing these ovals of information in different situations, remembering what happened, and which realization of that application turned out to be the most plausible, and knowing which application is the right thing to do from, for example, morality standpoint. That's the wisdom. So if we try to summarize the relationship between these two different dimensions of truth that we are operating with, you can see how it's building from some objective data and upward toward wisdom. And it's interesting that up until this point, which is the information, there is no human. The human opinion starts from here. That's when we try to make sense of the facts. And recently I was rereading the article by a person I admire very much, and maybe you've heard about him. His name is Ralph Ammer, and he is a very big visual thinker, and he has a nice TED talk on the drawing and thinking with a pen and that kind of stuff. And he is blogging a lot of visual thinking, and I don't know why. Why he's not available for more, and he's probably shy. But check his blog out; it's really cool. And in his articles, so his blog is ralphammer.com. In his articles, I found a quote which summarizes the essence of sense making. In his article, dedicated actually to the interaction design, not visual thinking as such, but in interaction design, I can understand visual thinking plays a huge role. He states that it's a very human thing to try and see the structure behind everything. So we are pattern machines. We are relentless and are never calm because we want to look at the chaos. We want to look at the collection of data pieces, and we want to see the structures. We want to create them. We want to make sense. So the make sense, sense making is therefore the attempt of the human to create a certain order out of those bits and pieces of data. And the reason we're doing that is that infinite search of the structure in everything around us is essential for our decision making. We cannot make a decision until we establish a pattern first that makes us comfortable about our next steps. We want to find the proof that we can control and predict the future by spotting the patterns and trying to predict the consequences of our action. So I wanted to talk about this sense-making bit to show you how we are, you could say, the architects of sense out of everything. And sometimes maybe there is no sense, but we will never stop looking for it. And I find it quite fascinating. So thanks, Ralph, for that insight. I owe that to you. And then on to the next topic about the decision making. So now we know that visual thinking gives us the key to unlock our imagination, and our imagination is in this relentless search for sense, for structures, and the only reason, maybe not the only reason, but one of the reasons for doing that is to make a decision so we know what to do. So I was also interested to check what is known in the field of business and the military and other domains, what is known about decision making. So there are two very popular models for decision making. One is from Dr. W. Edwards Deming, the so-called PDCA cycle. Maybe you've heard about that. Plan, do, check, act. That's one. Very popular, especially in the business world. And there are so many more other cycles for decision making. And they're all similar. So basically, they are probably different because they use different words, and they are all similar in the nature. And this one is by Dr. W. Edwards Deming. But I liked one the most. And that is by another person called John Boyd, I think. Yes. The reason I like John Boyd's decision-making cycle more is because he is a former fighter pilot. So that appeals to me much better. And I liked airplanes very much when I was a kid. So I wanted to be a fighter pilot myself when I was a kid. So when I was reading another book on agility, and then this OODA cycle was brought up, then I thought, like, that's my guy. Yes, I like this much more. So this other decision-making cycle called OODA stands for another thing, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And we could just stop here, but because it's from John Boyd and he is a former fighter pilot, I used that simply because I really wanted to draw an airplane in this presentation. And he piloted an airplane called F-86 Sabre, and he flew that airplane in the Korean War and did not have any confirmed kills with this airplane. But anyway, that's very, very cool. And after the war, he became a consultant for Pentagon, and he was really promoting this cycle, to enhance the operations, and finally this thinking penetrated the business world, and also ultimately it landed with agile thinking as well. So what that cycle is about, and you will start noticing some interesting patterns and similarities. The cycle goes like this. So let's say you are in that airplane and you don't have much time to make a decision. So what does John Boyd suggest us to look at, and in what order? Well, first of all, he says observe all of the important facts around you. So spot all of the elements, put them before you, visualize them, notice them, create basically a map, detect all of the elements that are important for some reason. So observe them. Once you scanned quickly the environment around you, bringing you the situational awareness, then you need to orient. So you need to understand, where are you located in relation to those elements? What is their relationship towards themselves? Are they working together? Are they working against you? Are they working for you? And analyze those relationships. Analyze your goals, analyze their goals, and quickly orient. Create that orientation. So that should be similar for you to creating the visual structures, right? So these are the facts, and now you create the structures. And that's the step number 2, orient. Then, after that, you need to decide, and the decision implies choosing strategies. So, should you move here and do something? Or should you turn left, change the altitude, and do something else? Or maybe you should just remove yourself from this scene because it's too dangerous for you and you stand no chances. So create the visualization of your alternatives and decide. What should you decide in this case? Well, maybe it's too dangerous and you don't want to risk your life. Then act on it. And that is what we are going to do, but with the application to organizational design. We're going to analyze the facts around us. We are going to observe. Then we will understand the relationship between those elements and the relationship with us. We will orient. Then we will try to understand the possible strategies for our decision making and side with one of those alternatives. And then hopefully at some point tomorrow or later in the week, you will act on that decision. You will turn that into action. And why is that important? I want to get back to the previous slide here, is that when you observe and orient and choose your decision to apply that strategy to the reality, you do not learn until you act. All of this is happening in your head, and this is just a simulation of reality. So it's not worth anything until you apply it to practice, so you could create an actual experience of interacting with the reality, something that gives you the wisdom. So that is an interesting comment to add here. I mean, you can think as much as you want, you can visualize as much as you want, but that doesn't make you wiser until you act, so that you could actually see how the reality interacts with you and whether your assumptions were wrong or correct. And finally, we're going to look into an example how this could be applied to practice. And I just want to summarize before we draw a parallel with the example from your life by looking at the organizational complexity. I want to remind that we're going to start with looking at data. We will collect data by observing the reality. Then we're going to find the structures and notice patterns. We're going to orient. So we will create an information out of it. And then we will try to see what are the possible strategies given the circumstances. So we will try to see, okay, should we go here, should we go there? And that is our decision making. So we will make a decision. What is the most plausible thing to do? And you will promise me to act on this. This is something that will have to happen when you get back to your reality. You will choose your decision and you will act on it and you will learn from it. And if you want to, you can reach out and share what happened. What did you learn? Were your assumptions correct? And above all, is this a method that should survive and should be, developed and shared with the rest? Maybe it's a fake method and it's not good enough, right? That's also a possibility. So today we will do these 3 steps, and the act, well, it's something you have to take outside. Now, I want to mention another super smart person, and that's the only person I had the honor to talk to so far. And that person, maybe you've heard about him, his name is Simon Wardley. Let's see if I can draw Simon nicely and quickly. Hopefully he doesn't see that. I'm really bad at drawing portraits. So Simon Wardley is known as the creator of so-called Wardley Maps. I'll just mention Wardley Maps. And he's very strict about what a map is. And what I call maps, like organizational complexity map, he is frowning upon, because in his definition that's not a map, it's more of a diagram. And the way Simon defines a map is something that has 6 categories. It has to have elements, data from what I have described to you. It has to have the position of those elements, basically placing them here and there and start seeing the connections, orienting. It has to have the anchor, basically the connection of what you're depicting to the reality. Where does it sit with reality? It has to have the context, so it should mean something. It shouldn't be super abstract, otherwise it's not relevant. And it should have the movement, so you should be able to depict what is the possibility of movement of the elements, and it has to be visual. So if I check against the criteria for something to be a map in terms of Simon Wardley, my maps are not maps. But that's okay, because I normally cannot show the movement. That's where I fail. I normally use the statical depictions of reality, but they're still useful. But you do check Simon Wardley and his thinking about Wardley Maps. It's a beautiful piece of information and knowledge Simon Wardley has devised the maps as an answer to the vacuum of visual tools in the world of strategy and strategical thinking. He says SWOT diagrams would never help Hannibal Barca to win this battle of Cannae because he needed a battle map. And the battle map satisfies this criteria. So he wanted to create a battle map, but for business world, and he has created so-called Wardley Maps that allow the business to plot the strategies and make fact-based decisions. But those are super complex things to understand, if you ask me. I will only show you something that is a bit more trivial compared to what Simon Wardley does, and we don't have the movement on them. But anyway, let's give those a shot. So this here is where we're going to play with the organizational complexity mapping, and we're going to find the data, we will observe, we will try to orient by finding the structures, we will think about strategies and have a commitment made about the next step to act on those insights. And the example I'm going to bring up is made up, so it's not something for real, but after that I will ask you to do that with application to your context, and hopefully you will be able to replicate the thinking and put that in the context of your situation. So let's take a case where the organizational complexity is concerning you with regards to your placement in a software development team. So let's say in this made-up example, you are a software developer joining a team responsible for the development of a certain software product serving real customers' needs. And you need to orient yourself and figure out what is that you should be focusing on in the first place, because it is so overwhelming for you. There are so many terms and so many things that you don't even know where to run for. So you need a clear path for focusing on what really matters. And we'll see if this tool can help you out. We'll start by capturing all of the data elements that you don't know yet whether they are useful or not, but you'll just map them out first. And you'll start by placing yourself in the center. Okay, that's an icon for you. One data element. Okay, what else is important? Well, we are developing software that is serving a customer. So we need a customer. This is our customer. The customer is always there with the challenges and problems, right? And let's say a customer is ABC, and that means a certain type of a customer. I don't know, maybe a student, maybe a case handler, doesn't really matter for the example. And that customer has challenges and has needs. And maybe you can capture a few of those just as bullet points to be more specific. And I will just use the squiggly lines because I don't want to make up some gibberish. It doesn't matter for the exercise. We will just note down a few that are really, really important. And let's say one of the challenges is the email. That's the only thing that I will put there because I need it to make sense. Then I know that I'm going to be, as a software developer, I'm going to be a part of the team. And let's call it a team A. And I want to double click on that team. I want to see who is there. We have John there, we have Peter, we have Mary. Okay, that's cool, and I'm going to land on that team somewhere. Nice. I keep on observing the data. What else? I know that this team is working on a product called Acme that is serving the customer. And I also know there is a guy, Paul, who is our product manager, who tells us what to do, what features to develop, what problems to solve. There is a person, Henrik, who is our HR manager. And I also know that the product we're working on as a team is developed on top of a stack of technologies, and I'm just going to list them out. And I will use a simplistic icon for the technology just to note those down. And again, we're just scanning this space for data. We don't know yet, is that relevant or not? We're not sure yet. And then I also spoke with Peter and have a very basic understanding of how this application is structured. So it has certain modules connected with each other, and there is some data storage. And that is the systems. And that's it. So I thought like I probably exhausted the data I could gather, and maybe something is missing, but that should do. So what happens next is that I start orienting. I want to understand how all of that is connected. So I know that the technology and systems are connected and they are supporting this product. I already established my connection with the team. I'm showing that I'm joining that team. And I could even put some data on it. So I'm joining it the 1st of March 21. And I also know that Henrik is managing our team, and Paul is giving us the features to develop. So he says, okay, these are the priorities for you. So that's our relationship with that. And we know that Paul is working with this product, but he's also working on a different product our team is not responsible for. And let's call that product X. And we know that this customer that our product is serving is not going to use that other product. And I don't know if it's important, but I just noted that down. And then I also noted from the recent conversation with Paul is that right now the biggest challenge is an email. And the reason why is this, that, and that. And if we don't fix that by the end of 21, then we're going to lose a lot of customers. And this is important. And then I spoke to other guys on the team, and I know that the problems with the email, they come predominantly from the way we store data. That's number one. And the module responsible for sending those emails, number two. So this is where these two things are connected. And I know that we only have the time by the end of the year to fix that. And I also know that this is Mary, who is knowledgeable about that. But she's going to leave the company soon, with all the knowledge she has. So as I continue orienting in this, I also start thinking about the decision-making process here. I start noticing the patterns that direct me into a possible strategy. So, for example, I need to figure out when Mary is out, because this is very critical for me, and this is my strategy A. I need to figure out, because if it's going to happen soon, I need to talk to the people involved in the decision making for where I should be focusing my efforts. I need to convince them that I shouldn't now sit and develop anything, but I need to speed up my process of learning as much as I can from Mary before she leaves. Another possible strategy for me is to probably pick the features that somehow are related to this area so that I could learn about those modules by programming new features or maybe fixing some bugs in that area, and maybe even pair programming with Mary to speed up my knowledge transition from her. And also maybe as a third strategy, maybe I should sit down and investigate what are the alternative ways to fix that problem without involving learning from Mary. Maybe we shouldn't spend that time on that, because maybe we can rewrite this module and then I don't even need to learn from her. It's okay that she takes all of the knowledge with her, because I'm going to rewrite it from the scratch and I will have enough time just to swap these systems without any problem. So that's where I start thinking out of the box about my potential and alternative strategies I could undertake. And once I have them, that's where I need to turn that into the action, because all of this thinking is fun and dandy, but if you don't act on it, that's where you lose the opportunity to learn. So once I solidify my strategies, I need to then take it into an action and maybe go to Henrik and discuss that with him, or maybe I should act by sitting down with the team and sharing my insights with them to gain some confidence that I'm onto something good. But that's in a nutshell a demonstration how you could use visual thinking to analyze very complex and hairy problems in a way that they are not as frightening for you anymore, because you can break down the complexity, you can create your battle map and hopefully win the day for you. So that's the presentation bit, and I think it's a good time for a few questions before I will ask you to set a timer and try to map your organizational complexity and try to apply these techniques and ideas to where you are with your team. If you are a freelancer, where are you with your current customers and assignments? If you're a manager, what's happening on your team and how you could develop. So try to see how you could apply that to your reality.